The corridors of the Reich Chancellery were cold that morning, colder than usual, as if the stone itself sensed something poisonous moving through the air. Officers moved stiffly, avoiding eye contact, walking as though each step might lead them into a trap. Outside, snow fell over Berlin, burying the city in a silence that felt less like winter and more like a warning. The war was tilting toward catastrophe, but no one dared speak the truth out loud. Not inside these walls, not around that man. In a narrow room lit only by weak lamps, General Walter Hohmann studied the sheets of paper spread across the table, numbers scribbled in red ink, arrows dipped into imaginary terrain. He could hear his heartbeat echo in his skull, the truth about the army's strength. Its actual strength stared back at him like a confession written by trembling hands. He wished he could burn the reports, wished he could rip them to shreds, but the truth had already taken root in his mind, curling around him like vines waiting to choke. The divisions weren't at full strength, the battalions weren't ready, and the replacements promised by the Ministry of Armaments existed mostly on paper. The front lines were thinning like a frayed rope, soldiers exhausted, supplies dwindling, fuel almost phantom. The army was not what Hitler believed it to be. It wasn't even close. A knock at the door snapped him upright. General Konrad Riener entered quickly, shutting the door behind him with a soft but tense push. His face was pale, and his eyes burned with the panic he tried desperately to disguise. He gestured at the papers. "Is that the final count?" "Yes," Hohmann whispered. "And it's worse than we thought." Riener exhaled sharply, rubbing a trembling hand against his forehead. "We've been lying for months. Inflated numbers, imaginary regiments, battalions merged but still listed separately, God help us." Hohmann swallowed. "God isn't coming to this building." Both men looked toward the reinforced door at the hallway's end, the one that led to Hitler's war room. Behind it, delusion shaped reality and fear shaped truth. Telling the truth meant risking execution. Hiding it meant risking destruction on a scale Germans had never imagined. Riener spoke first. "He's going to ask again today. He'll want confirmation that the Army Group Vistula is at full strength. And we'll give him the numbers he wants," Hohmann said, though even as he spoke, his voice cracked at the edges, revealing the terror beneath. "Are you prepared for the consequences when he discovers the truth?" Riener whispered. Hohmann closed his eyes, the weight inside him turning heavier. "He will find out. Men cannot fight without ammunition. They cannot march without food. They cannot obey orders if they are dead." Riener drew closer, his voice urgent and low. "Hohmann, he killed people for less, for doubt, for hesitation. What do you think he'll do when he discovers his entire army, his last hope, is a shadow on paper?" Before Hohmann could answer, the heavy footsteps of adjutants approached. The door opened, and a young officer appeared, stiff as iron. "The Führer requests your presence." The words fell like a guillotine blade. The two generals exchanged a single look, one that contained fear, guilt, and resignation. Then they followed the officer down the corridor toward the room where truth went to die. The war room was dim, the air thick with smoke from Hitler's ever-burning cigarettes. Maps sprawled across the large table, arrows drawn in bold strokes, suggesting victories that existed only in his imagination. Hitler stood hunched over the central map, one hand gripping the table as though holding himself upright required effort. His hair was unkempt, his eyes sunken and discolored, but the volatile energy that surrounded him, part madness, part feverish determination, remained unchanged. He did not look up when the generals entered. "You're late," he muttered. "Apologies, my Führer," Riener said. Hitler's gaze flicked up, sharp and hostile. "I asked for the status of Army Group Vistula. Do you have the updated numbers?" "Yes, my Führer," Hohmann said, stepping forward. Hitler stared at him with a look that pierced straight through the surface of flesh and bone. "Then speak." Hohmann swallowed. "The total effective strength stands at." Riener cut in smoothly, knowing the correct lie. 380,000, my Führer. Fully supplied, morale stabilized, and armored support nearing the levels projected. Hitler's eyes narrowed, a gleam of satisfaction flashing for the briefest moment. And the fresh divisions promised from the reserve training camps. They have arrived. Yes, Riener lied again. They have arrived and are being integrated. Hitler straightened slightly, his pallid face lifting with something close to triumph. "Good, good. You see, gentlemen, my instincts have not failed me. The cowardly whispers about the army collapsing are nothing but defeatist fantasies." Hohmann forced himself to nod. Hitler's gaze darkened. "I will not tolerate lies, and I can smell them like smoke, like disease." Both generals froze. Hitler stepped around the table, his movements slow, deliberate, the way a predator circles prey before the strike. He came close enough for them to smell the bitterness on his breath. "Tell me," he said softly, too softly, "if I were to check these numbers myself, if I were to demand confirmation from the field commanders, would the numbers be the same?" Silence. 1 second, 2, 3, the longest seconds of their lives. Riener spoke first, his voice strained. "My Führer, the situation is fluid. Communications are slow. Reports take time to verify." "Enough," Hitler roared, slamming his fist on the table. The maps fluttered like dying birds. Both generals stiffened. Hitler's voice dropped again, chillingly controlled. "You think I don't know when men are lying to me? You think I haven't seen it before? I've seen betrayal in the eyes of cowards, traitors, and weaklings, and I see something in yours right now." He leaned closer, fear. Neither man moved, neither dared breathe. Hitler's lips curled. "Fear is good. It means you understand the consequences of failure." He turned away, pacing back toward the far map. "Very well. Prepare your plan. I want an offensive within 10 days. A strike that will crush the enemy and prove all the pessimistic worms wrong." The meeting ended, but the terror had only begun. When the door closed behind them, Hohmann exhaled shakily, leaning against the wall. "He suspects everything," he whispered. "It's only a matter of time." Riener nodded grimly. "We need to prepare for the moment he finds out." They didn't know when that moment would come. They didn't know how violently he would react, but they sensed it approaching, like thunder rolling in the distance. It came 3 nights later. A courier burst into Hohmann's office, breathless, drenched in sweat, clutching a folder stamped urgent. "The latest field reports," he said, placing them on the desk. Hohmann opened the folder, and his stomach dropped. Casualty rates had spiked. Entire companies had disappeared. Fuel shortages were catastrophic. The Army's strength was barely half of what they had claimed. And the worst part, the Eastern Front commander, unable to hide the truth any longer, had sent a direct summary addressed explicitly to Hitler's headquarters. Hohmann's blood went cold. He's going to see it. Riener entered moments later, reading the panic on Homan's face before he saw the papers. Is that? Yes. Rayner shut the door behind him, his breath coming fast. Can we intercept it? No. It's already logged, already in the system, already on its way. Rayner sank into a chair. Then God help us. But God wasn't coming, not for them, not for Germany, not for the man waiting at the end of the hall, who would soon see the truth they had hidden like a tumor. The summons came at dawn. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretched by fear. Soldiers watched silently as the two generals walked past, their boots echoing on the stone floor, each step dragging them closer to judgment. Inside the war room, Hitler stood motionless, holding the report with trembling hands. He did not look up. He did not speak. He simply stared at the paper, as if the words themselves were poison. Finally, his voice came, barely more than a whisper. What is this? No one answered. Hitler lifted his gaze, and what they saw in his eyes made their blood run cold. This report, he said, his voice cracking, this says the army group Vistula is at half strength, half silence. It says armored support is almost non-existent. It says morale is collapsing. It says, his voice broke entirely. It says everything you told me was a lie. Homan tried to speak, but nothing emerged. Hitler stepped forward slowly. One step, another. Then he shouted a sound so violent the lamps rattled. You lied to me. Both generals flinched. You stood in this room. Hitler raged, looked me in the eye, and fed me fantasies. You sabotaged my plans. You betrayed Germany. My Führer, Rayner began, but Hitler cut him off with a scream. Do not speak. You will not speak. He grabbed the map on the table, ripping it apart, shredding it with shaking hands. Do you know what your lies have cost? He snarled. Do you know how many men have died because you misled me? He threw the pieces of the map to the floor, breathing hard, spittle gathering at the corner of his mouth. You think you can hide the truth from me. I see everything. I know everything, and I know betrayal when it stands before me. He paced wildly, slamming his fist into the table again and again. My Führer, Homan finally managed, his voice weak. Silence. Hitler pointed a trembling finger at them. For months you told me the army was strong. For months you assured me reinforcements existed. For months you lied to protect yourselves, lied to avoid my anger, lied because you are cowards. He stepped closer, face twisted with hatred. And the worst part, you lied because you thought I was too blind to see the truth. Homan felt the room tilt. Rayner tried to stand firm, but sweat streamed down his face. Hitler's voice softened, turning dangerous. Tell me why did you lie? Rayner swallowed. My Führer, if we had told you the truth earlier, you would have dismissed half the command, executed others. The front would have collapsed completely. Hitler's eyes narrowed to slits. So you lied because you feared me. Neither spoke. Hitler let out a cold, hollow laugh. You feared me more than the enemy. He stepped so close they could feel the heat of his breath. Now you will learn what true fear is. He reached for the phone. Guards. The door opened instantly. 2 SS officers entered, rigid and expressionless. Hitler pointed at the generals. Arrest them. Both men felt the ground drop beneath their feet. My Führer, please, Rayner begged. But Hitler screamed, you betrayed me. You betrayed Germany. You left me to fight with ghosts. You will answer for your treason. As the guards seized the generals, Hitler turned away, trembling uncontrollably, his voice a mixture of rage and despair. They lied to me. He whispered to himself, everyone lies. Everyone betrays me. His voice grew smaller. No one tells me the truth. His hands shook violently. No one. He sank into his chair, eyes vacant, breathing shallow. Behind him, the generals were dragged out of the room, their fate sealed, their lives broken. But the destruction didn't end with them. Because now Hitler knew the truth, and the truth would destroy everything. The hallway echoed with the scuffling of boots as the generals were dragged away, their protests swallowed by the cold, indifferent silence of the chancellery. Outside the war room door, the guards marched them in opposite directions, splitting them like branches torn from a dying tree. Their footsteps faded down different corridors, and soon only the low hum of distant machinery remained. Inside, Hitler sat motionless, staring at the shredded map on the floor. Paper fragments dotted the rug like pieces of a corpse. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts. His fingers twitched uncontrollably. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on him with every passing second. He whispered again, barely audible, "They lied to me." This time there was no one to hear. An adjutant entered cautiously, carrying a fresh portfolio of reports. His hands shook as he approached the table. "My Führer," he murmured. "These are the updated communications from—" "Put them down," Hitler said sharply without looking up. The adjutant obeyed, stepping back quickly, as though any closer proximity risked being consumed completely. Hitler stared at the reports. His mind raced through the months of illusions he had been fed. The imaginary divisions, the non-existent fuel reserves, the hollow claims of morale, all the lies he had swallowed willingly because they allowed him to keep believing in victory. Now the illusions were burning away, and what remained beneath them was darkness, deep and bottomless. A second officer entered moments later with a message. "My Führer, the Russians have launched another offensive near. I don't want to hear about the Russians." Hitler roared suddenly, pounding his hand against the table so violently the officer flinched. "I want to know who else has been lying to me." The officer froze, unsure if answering would worsen the situation. Hitler stood, pacing with erratic energy. Find out which departments exaggerated their reports. Find out which commanders wrote fantasy instead of reality. Find out who is responsible for this catastrophe. The officer nodded fearfully. "Yes, my Führer. And bring Jodl, bring Kätel, bring everyone, no more excuses, no more lies." The officer fled. For a long moment, Hitler stood alone in the war room. The silence pressed heavy on him, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He stared at it as though it were mocking him. Each second that passed felt like another piece of his control slipping away. When Jodl and Kätel arrived, they found Hitler hunched over the table again, clutching the latest report in a white, knuckled grip. "My Führer," Kätel began, "we were told—" "Silence," Hitler snapped. He thrust the report into Kätel's hands. "Read it." Kätel read it quickly, his expression tightening. "This must be a mistake," he murmured. These numbers," Hitler interrupted, "are the truth. And everything you have told me for months has been the lie." Jodl stepped forward cautiously. "My Führer, we relied on what the field commanders—" "Lies," Hitler shouted, his voice cracking at the edges. "All of you fed me lies. You told me the army was strong. You told me reinforcements were coming. You told me we had enough fuel to launch counteroffensives." Jodl swallowed hard. "We were assured. You were fooled." Hitler spat. "And then you fooled me." Kätel hesitated. My Führer, surely you do not believe that every report was falsified intentionally. The fog of war. Don't lecture me on war, Hitler hissed, leaning across the table. I invented the victories you stand on. Keitel's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Hitler's voice softened suddenly, dangerously. Do you know what it means that the generals I trusted, men I elevated, men I protected betrayed me? No one spoke. It means Germany has been undermined from within. He continued in a whisper, sabotaged by weakness, by cowardice, by treason dressed as loyalty. Jodl stepped forward, trying desperately to regain control. My Führer, we can still reorganize the remaining divisions. The front may be weakened, but if we withdraw to more defensible. Hitler slammed his fist onto the table. Withdraw, surrender land, yield even a meter, never. The room fell still. There will be no retreat, Hitler said. Not one step, not 1 inch. The army will hold, the people will fight. Anyone who speaks of withdrawal is a traitor. He glared at them with hollow, feverish eyes that burned with equal parts rage and despair. We will win, he muttered. We must, because the alternative is death. Jodl felt his stomach twist. He knew what Hitler really meant. If the war collapsed, everything collapsed with it. Hitler's power, their positions, the entire hierarchy built on ambition and fear. And so the delusion would continue, even as the walls crumbled around them. Hours later, after Hitler dismissed them with the threat of severe consequences for any further inaccuracies, Jodl and Keitel walked quietly through the corridor. Did you know, Jodl whispered, Keitel's face was ashen, about the real strength? Yes, I suspected, but even I didn't realize how bad it was. Jodl shook his head. This will lead to our destruction. Keitel exhaled. It already has. Meanwhile, deep within the chancellery, Hohmann and Riener sat in separate rooms under guard. Neither knew the other's fate. Neither knew what Hitler had decided. They only knew their families had been cut off, their privileges stripped, their futures erased with a single outburst. Riener stared at the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. He replayed every moment in his mind, the lies, the meetings, the pressure, the endless fear. He had once believed in the cause, believed in discipline, in duty. But the further the war progressed, the more he realized the truth. He and his fellow generals weren't leading a nation. They were puppets tied to a man descending into madness. And puppets eventually got their strings cut. In his room, Hohmann pressed his hands over his face and whispered, "This is the end." But it wasn't, not yet. Hitler had more unraveling to do before the final collapse. Late that night, Hitler called another emergency gathering. His closest remaining officers sat silently around the table while he paced in frantic circles. The light flickered overhead. His hands shook uncontrollably. His voice wavered between whispers and shouts. "They think they can deceive me," he muttered. "They think they can hide the truth from me. But I see them. I see all of them. Liars, weaklings, defeatists. They hate me because I see the truth." He stopped suddenly, turning to the officers with a wild gleam in his eyes. "Do you know what truth is?" he asked. "It is that Germany can still win, even now, even with the traitors, even with the saboteurs. Victory is possible." No one responded. His voice hardened, "But only if everyone obeys. Obedience is life. Disobedience is death. Betrayal will be crushed." He slammed both hands onto the table. "I will not be lied to again." In the corner of the room, a young communications officer trembled. He had seen the numbers too. He knew the truth, and he knew that no matter how many times Hitler ordered reality to obey him. The world outside the bunker didn't bend to his will. But saying so would mean death. Hitler continued pacing. They lied because they feared my reaction. So now I will show them a reaction worth fearing. Eyes widened around the room. Hitler raised his hand as though delivering a decree. Starting immediately, any officer caught falsifying reports will face court-martial and execution. Any commander who exaggerates strength will be removed. Any soldier who retreats without orders will be shot. Silence. One officer finally gathered the courage to speak. My Führer, if we impose measures this harsh, morale, Hitler snapped. Morale is for the weak. Fear will keep order now. Fear will bring obedience. His pupils were dilated, his expression feverish. His mind was spiraling, but no one dared say it. No one dared confront him. Confrontation meant death. Send orders to every front. Hitler demanded. No more lies. No more weakness. No more betrayal. The meeting ended with shoulders tense and hearts heavy. Outside, the Russian artillery thundered closer to Berlin. Inside, paranoia took deeper root. The next morning, Hohmann and Riener were summoned back to the war room. Guards escorted them with rifles drawn, though neither man resisted. They were exhausted, hollow, broken. Hitler waited for them in silence. When they entered, he didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply stared at them, his face still, his voice disturbingly calm. You lied to me, he said, neither denied it. You undermined my authority. Still, no protest. Because of your lies, thousands died. Because of your lies, victory slipped further away. Because of your lies, I stood surrounded by illusions. Hohmann looked down. Riener closed his eyes. Hitler stepped closer. Tell me, he asked in a soft voice that chilled their blood, do you understand what you have done? Riener whispered, yes. And do you accept responsibility? Yes, Hohmann said, his voice barely audible. Hitler nodded slowly. Good. For a moment, it seemed he might spare them. But Hitler did not forgive betrayal. He didn't even understand it. He motioned to the guards, take them to the detention wing. Their trial will be held tomorrow. Their sentence will be carried out immediately after. Hohmann felt the air leave his lungs. Riener staggered, but Hitler wasn't finished. He leaned forward slightly, and let their fate be a warning. The next man who lies to me about the army's condition will not get a trial. The guards seized the generals again, dragging them away. Hitler returned to the table, staring down at the maps with an emptiness that bordered on madness. His empire was collapsing. His officers were terrified. His armies were disintegrating. And yet he still believed, truly believed, that victory could be forced into existence if he simply demanded it loudly enough. As the roar of artillery rattled the distant windows, Hitler whispered to himself, They will not lie to me again. But it was too late. Truth had already caught up with him. The lie he believed in most, the lie of invincibility, was about to shatter, and when it broke, it would take the entire regime with it. Outside, the night deepened. Shadows stretched across the city. The front collapsed inch by inch, and deep inside the chancellery, the man clinging to the last threads of power muttered to himself, pacing endlessly as the world he tried to control slipped away, uncontained, unstoppable. In the end, the lies didn't destroy him. The truth did, and it was coming for him, closer every hour, like thunder rolling toward a man who could no longer hear the storm.